Today, we are going to unpack a really powerful idea from the philosopher Daniel N. Robinson. It's a single, sharp distinction that, believe it or not, might just be the key to the future of self-government as we know it.
So let's dive right in. The core question is this: what are we, fundamentally? Are we agents? Beings who make conscious choices, who act for reasons? Or are we just complicated biological organisms that basically react to whatever the world throws at us?
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds like a pretty abstract debate for a philosophy class. But here's the thing. Robinson argues, and the source material we're looking at is very clear on this, that our answer to this question isn't just academic. It's the absolute foundation of our entire civic order.
So what exactly is this critical distinction? Let's really break down these two totally different ways of looking at what it means to be human. So, are we the captains of our own ship, or are we basically just cogs in a giant machine? That's really what this is all about. On one side, you've got the agent. This is a being that acts based on reason, that makes choices, that is a cause of its own actions. But on the other side, you have the organism, a being that simply reacts, that adapts, and is ultimately seen as just the end product of a long chain of external causes. And Robinson himself put it so well. He said, "The vocabulary of neurons is not the vocabulary of persons." Think about that. You can't explain concepts like justice or intention or responsibility just by mapping out which neurons are firing. Those ideas, they belong to the world of persons, of agents. And that's a reality that you just can't boil down to simple anatomy. Okay, so here's where it gets really urgent. The source material argues that this fundamental idea, that we are agents, is actually under serious threat right now from something Robinson called scientific imperialism. So what on earth is scientific imperialism? Well, it's this idea that fields like neuroscience or information theory can explain everything about us. It's an attempt to reduce human beings to these incredibly complex but ultimately predictable biological computers that can be understood and then, managed. In that worldview, there's just no room left for real moral agency. And this is where you really start to see the political fallout. When you view humans as just predictable organisms, which is a perspective that comes out of evolutionary behaviorism, it directly clashes with the whole tradition of natural law that so heavily influenced the American founders. See, that tradition requires responsible citizens. The point the source makes is pretty stark. You simply cannot build a republic on a theory of organisms. If you try, you'll end up destroying the very idea of a citizen. This brings us right to the architecture of American governance itself. The source makes a really compelling case that the founders were operating squarely on the belief that we are, in fact, agents. I mean, just think about it for a second. The whole concept of inalienable rights, does that even make sense if we're just a bundle of nerves reacting to stimuli? The source argues that no, it doesn't. That idea only works if you believe we have a real, fundamental nature, that we are moral agents. And the same exact logic applies to the rule of law. Law is built on the assumption that we are rational beings, that we can understand its principles, reason about them, and then freely consent to be governed by them. See, an organism is merely conditioned. An agent consents. That's a huge difference. And all of this leads up to the big one, self-government. The entire project rests on this core belief that citizens are agents who are capable of taking part in a rational, ordered society. Not just a herd of organisms that need to be managed by some class of experts. So why does this debate from centuries ago matter so much right now? Well, the source connects it directly to one of the biggest challenges of our time, the rise of what people are calling agentic AI. We're starting to throw that word agent around and apply it to AI systems, but according to the source, this is a massive mistake. It's a category error. Sure, an AI can simulate goal-oriented behavior, but it doesn't have genuine agency. It has no will. It has no conscience. It's an incredibly sophisticated process, yes, but it is not a person. And confusing these two things has some really dangerous real-world consequences. Morally, responsibility starts to shift away from people and onto systems. The algorithm did it becomes the perfect excuse. Legally, the whole idea of who's to blame gets blurry. And politically, the change is massive. Rational debate gets replaced by data-driven optimization, and our consent as citizens gets replaced with just compliance. So what do we do? How do we defend against the slide into a society that's just managed? The source presents Robinson's principle as our most important firewall. By holding firm to that clear line between an agent and an organism, we protect the three pillars of a free republic. First, liberty, which requires a moral agent who can be free. Second, law, which requires reason, not just raw computation. And third, sovereignty, which resides in people, not in computer programs. And the source warns that when we transfer agency to an AI, what we're really doing is transferring sovereignty away from the people.
Now let's be crystal clear about this. This is not an anti-science or anti-technology argument, not at all. It's about putting science back in its proper place. Science is an amazing tool for understanding the mechanical world, but it can't be the foundation for our moral and political world. For that, you need metaphysics, the understanding of being itself.
And I think this quote from Robinson just absolutely nails it. It distills this entire complex argument into one single powerful sentence. Only persons act. Everything else operates. Persons act with will, with intention. Everything else, from a rock to a river to the most advanced AI we can imagine, simply operates according to its programming or its nature. And so we're left with this final and I think really provocative thought. In an age where we're surrounded by algorithms and AI that can mimic human behavior with stunning accuracy, the most essential act of civic defense is to insist on this distinction. The source concludes that the Republic can only survive if we, as citizens, refuse to accept the simulation for the real thing. And the question for all of us is, how do we draw that line every single day?